What's going on, guys? You're listening to the David F. Haas podcast, episode 126. This episode is going to be about mastering your emotions and how to overcome anger, frustration, especially for high achievers. If you're watching this, my podcast room is under a little bit of a renovation, so I apologize for the different look, but in an effort to constantly be growing and getting better, we're always changing things. And this podcast is in the top 1% of all podcasts. I just heard Alex Hormozi say that, because if you make more than 21 podcasts, you're in the top 1% of all podcasters. Just so you know that, it's all about continuing to do this. And if you're a high achiever, you know that a lot of times you do a lot of work and you don't feel like there's a reward. But you just got to keep going because you believe in what it is that you're doing. And so, over here, we're constantly looking to improve. We're constantly looking to make the podcast better. And part of that is speaking directly to the people that I help, which is high achievers who seemingly have kind of checked all the boxes in the success world. They've made the money, they have the house, they have the car, the family, but even though they have all that outwardly success, they're struggling inwardly, and they're feeling anger, frustration, overwhelm. They can't relax. They're starting to see those trends in their children. Maybe they have failing relationships. And so it's like, I recognized recently that there's so much importance to this work that I do, because it is so critical to have awareness. And if you don't have awareness, you could easily go down the wrong road for a very, very long period of time. And by the time you realize that you have gone down the wrong road for years, it may be too late to turn around and correct that road that you went down. It may just feel easier to start on a completely new path, which is fine. But I've seen so many people over the years that I've helped, when they come to these new awarenesses about why they are the way they are, they begin to recognize that pretty much every decision they've ever made in their life has been made from this place of falsehood, from this place of protection. And now they're seeing things completely differently. And sometimes seeing things completely differently means that we step out of the things that once defined us. For example, like entrepreneurship. And now I'm not saying you're going to step out of entrepreneurship once you hear these 7 tips that I have about breaking free from anger and frustration. But the key is awareness. And for me, all my awareness started when I had a business partner who basically started introducing me to a new way of eating, which was, at that time, it was a vegan diet. And this isn't a proponent of vegan or vegetarianism, but that was a wake-up call for me. I was just saying this on my last podcast with Hope Monaco, that when I started recognizing the food I was putting into my body, and recognizing all of the programs that I had bought into, for example, like that there's 5 basic food groups, like that's just a program that is fed to us through like a marketing machine, so that we eat the foods that are being promoted. And once you see that, you're like, oh my God, you can't unsee it. But the same thing is true for spiritual growth or for personal development. Once you have awareness, you can't unsee it. But for most of us, we don't even know where to begin, because even most counselors, psychiatrists, they're not even living this life of transcending these emotions, right? And so I remember Andrew, my mentor, and I were doing some retreats and stuff, and we put all of these yoga teachers on stress test. And they were all like 99 out of 100 stressed. And it just goes to show you, I guarantee that I could do the same thing with a lot of social workers and psychiatrists and psychologists, is that they're not actually putting into practice the things that they're kind of preaching. And mostly because they're unaware of what it actually takes to heal, because they haven't done it for themselves. And so everything that I teach is from a place of experience. I learned how to overcome this stuff on my own, but I want to say on my own. I learned how to overcome this stuff, not on my own, through teachings, through learning, through studying, had a mentor, and I put it into practice is what I'm trying to say. And so because of that, I can speak like very knowledgeably on it. I don't have to have notes. I just speak from the heart. And so from the heart and from the experience. And that's what I'm going to do here today. So if you're struggling with anger, frustration, you're starting to see that just play out in every area of your life, then stay tuned and I'll kind of walk you through. And what I'm basically going to do is walk you through understanding why you have anger in the first place. We're going to help you understand what that anger is protecting you from. Once we understand that and we make that link, that in itself is the beginning of the letting go process. But then we're going to identify what the payoff is. We're going to recognize how to become aware of anger and how to step out of it very quickly. We're going to talk about why anger management is not a good thing. And also we're going to talk about why most high achievers are angry. And so that's the kind of what I'm going to walk you guys through here today. So hopefully it serves you. So first thing is let's understand anger. So anger, the way I see it, and when you really begin to see it, is it's basically made the world go round. The reason that 80% of the world is trapped at the level of consciousness of anger is because there's so much energy in anger. There's so much fuel. If you think of the victim of the world, right? Who just nothing ever goes their way. They have terrible luck. You think about their energy. It's almost like the energy of Eeyore, right? But then if you think of the energy of John Wick, right? Look at the energy that John Wick had in the John Wick movies. He killed thousands of people, right? That's there's just so much more fuel in anger. And that's why we relate to these movies like John Wick and things like that, because we're just connected to the fuel that you get from anger. So this is the payoff, one of the payoffs that we're going to get into later, that we get from anger. So that's why it's hard to step out of it. But even if you recognize the payoff, it's not enough to break free. What we really need to understand about anger is that it is protection. If you create the visualization that anger is essentially a shield, and every time somebody is throwing a harpoon at the thing that hurts you most, or your most vulnerable, the most vulnerable part of you, we immediately put up our defense, which is our shield of anger. And so in order to step out of anger, the first thing that we have to understand is, what is that shield protecting us from? And if we can tune into what it's protecting us from, and we can make the link to that pain and anger, every time anger pops up, we are going to recognize that that is just a protection against the pain of not being good enough, let's say, for example. And when you see that, you can't unsee it. So what happens by making this connection is we begin to move from being in anger to observing anger. And when we observe our anger, it changes. So David Bohm, I believe, was the guy that created the observer effect, which was essentially they're shooting these light particles through these tiny little spaces, and they recognized that they didn't respond. They kept on responding differently, and they couldn't figure out why. But what they realized is it was because they were observing them that they were changing. And so when we're able to move into this space of observing our anger, essentially catching ourselves in anger, that observation alone begins to create a change in it. If we can then connect that observation to the pain that anger is protecting us from, we've gone even a step further. So if we can first, step one is to observe. Step two is to understand, well, what is that anger protecting us from? And so you can dive into this pretty easily on your own, just by analyzing a trigger. So let me walk you through my own process, and then you can begin to kind of follow along here. So I went to the BEA Awards, where my business was nominated for best hospitality business or something like that, and we lost. And I was so angry, and I immediately recognized that I was in anger. But even in the recognition of anger, and I knew I had to go and be what is it beyond the anger that I have to deal with? I didn't want to get out of it. I was not enjoying, but it was easier to remain in the anger than it was to deal with the pain beyond the anger. And so what were the behaviors that I exhibited? Well, one was, it was like an award show and then a dinner after. And we just left and we didn't go to the dinner. Me and my team, we went to the keg actually and we vented. And that's another thing that you do is you vent when you were in anger. You were telling everybody. It's like the story of, the guy that cut you in line at the grocery store, and you basically can't wait to get home to tell your wife how you told him off from cutting you in line, right? And so it's like this, all of this fuel that exists in anger. And so after I recognized that I was consciously escaping or consciously, not dealing with my anger, and I was allowing myself to remain in it, the next morning when the anger had been turned down a little bit, I was then able to allow myself to step into it fully. And what does stepping into anger fully look like? It's really allowing yourself to feel the energy of anger, right? And notice where you're feeling it in the body, and then allowing yourself to keep all of your attention and focus on that energy until it burns out. And now when you connect, the good thing about anger is that you can really connect to it. It's very, the physical cues are like very real. Where I feel anger is like I feel like in the clenching of the fist, the tension in the neck. And so you can tune into these physical cues. You can identify on a scale of 1 to 10 how mad you are at your dad when you were 13 years old and he told you couldn't go on that trip with your buddies or whatever it may be. And so you can tune into the rage that is flowing through your body. And the key is to allow yourself to sit in that rage. And you can basically rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And then you can sit in the energy of that anger without venting it. It's like tuning into the energy right before you scream in somebody's face or right before you punch somebody in the face. You don't want to actually allow the venting of the energy. You want to sit in the energy. And as you sit in the energy, as you just keep all of your attention on the anger that's coursing through your body, it will begin to reduce. It's like watching a fire burn out. And as that fire burns out, what will be revealed to you is what pain it was protecting you from. So as we sit in the anger and we let that energy burn out, underneath that anger is the sadness. And so there's a saying in the work that I do is like, underneath all mad is sad. And so before we can even deal with the sadness, we have to let the anger go, right? So step 1, we observe. Step 2, we sit in the pain, or we sit in the energy of the anger, and we just allow ourselves to be completely 100% focused on the anger. We ignore all thoughts. When I lost that award, I was justifying and rationalizing and coming up with all of these excuses that were trying to make me feel better, essentially. But it was all BS. I had to let the anger run its course. And then after I let the anger run its course, what was revealed to me was essentially the pain of like not being accepted, right? The questioning of, should I be more of a schmoozer, essentially? Should I, because that's what I recognize these awards were all about. It was all about like who you know, and that's never been who I am. I've always kind of been a little bit of a, keep my head down and do my own thing kind of person. And so it was like the pain of not being the cool kid, right? And so then after that was revealed to me, just by making the connection that it was associated with that pain, because I've already done so much work on that pain, I was able to let it go pretty quickly. And then because of getting out of that anger and getting out of that pain, what happened to me next was like really miraculous. The next night, I was giving a talk at this youth diversion center, where I'm just basically talking to kids that are kind of like struggling or have had tough lives. And like the talk went great. And then I had my group call with my group coaching, and like we had this great connection. And I was reminded of what was actually important to me, right? And I wouldn't have been able to see that if I would have been trapped in the energy of anger, right? And so for most people, especially if you've listened to this podcast this long, most people remain trapped in anger their entire lives without even becoming aware of it. And this is what I was talking about, the importance of this work, is that you have to become aware of what it is that you're feeling and how it is attracting the life that is not serving you. So, because it's in that awareness we can begin to make a change. So it's like the first step is awareness. And so I talk about it like this. It's like when I was unaware, I would be on the bus of anger without even knowing I was on the bus of anger, right? I was just mad at the world, right? And the angry person will continue to attract situations in their life for them to be angry, right? And later, when I started observing that I was in anger, I basically would observe that I'm on the bus. And once I observed that I was on the bus, I could literally just pull the dinger and get off the bus. As I got better at this, I would be on the bus for less and less time before I became aware that I was on the bus. So, you know, when I started this work, maybe I'd be on the bus for 2 weeks. Then it would be like a week. Then it'd be like a day. And then it'd be like a second, right? And I would be able to step out of anger immediately. And this is the power that the mind has over the emotions. The mind can observe emotions because emotions are held in the body, and the body has power over the mind. Or sorry, the mind has power over the body. And so when we observe, we can then get off the bus. And then when we get really good, we can feel the energy of anger just boiling up in us, and we can just choose to not get on the bus. Right. And so with that awareness that the mind can observe emotions, that is the first key. That is the first step. And then the second thing is to learn how to process and analyze those emotions to get to the root cause of them. So recognizing that anger is protection from some sort of pain, and then learning how to connect to that pain so that we can let it go for good. Once we let go of, let's say, for example, the pain of not being good enough, then if someone tries to push the button of not good enough in us by, for example, like we lose an award, then what will happen is that button cannot be pushed. It's deactivated if we've done the work. So we no longer need the protection of anger, right? And so this is how we begin to step out of anger. And now we talk about like anger management, right? And the last thing that we ever want to do with any emotion is manage it, right? We don't want to come up with coping mechanisms or ways to distract ourselves. We want to allow that emotion to come up in a judgment-free space and allow ourselves to feel it completely. In fact, it's the resistance of feeling the emotion that is the source of all suffering. And if we can learn how to first observe and then to connect fully to an emotion and allow the energy of that emotion to run its course, then we become free. And then when we no longer need the protections that we have created to protect ourselves from this pain, we become limitless. And so at the source of all of our limits are the protections that we have created to protect us from feeling pain. For example, if you are a perfectionist, that is a limitation, because in perfectionism, you are protecting yourself from the pain of failure, for example. And if you are a perfectionist, you basically try and make sure that everything is perfect before you even start. And what that may end up doing is never allowing you to start. And it's all out of avoidance of failure. And as you can see, that I've completely transcended any perfectionism because I'm sitting in a podcast room that's half complete, right? Even though I'm on podcast 126 or whatever this is, right? And so it's like, when you recognize these protections, and anger is the ultimate protection because there's the most addictive because there's so much anger in it. When we recognize these protections, that awareness in and of itself is the beginning stages of letting go. And so let's move on to higher achievers. So why most high achievers are pretty angry, right? And so this actually makes perfect sense because there's so much energy in anger, right? It's like the guy that got sick of like cleaning up horse shit behind his horse and carriage is the guy that invented the car, kind of thing, right? You know, and the people that got sick of bumpy roads are the guy that invented pavement. And it's because they're so mad that this is the way things were, that they had the energy to go out and change it. Now, I'm not saying that that's exactly what happened with these people, but anger, there's so much fuel in anger. And because of that, a lot of good comes from people that are angry, right? And once we see that, and then we go out and actually achieve the thing that we were so angry about. Like, let's say, for example, that our dad, basically created the, because of his disapproval of who we were, he created the belief in us that we were not good enough, and we're so mad at our dad. Like, this is like Alex Hormozi talks about all of this, that essentially all of his success is about the anger he has towards his dad and proving that he could do it without him, kind of thing, right? And so you can see what is created out of anger, and so it's easy to get addicted to it. But then once you get all of that outward success, and you haven't actually dealt with the source of the anger, that is when it becomes problematic, because now we no longer have the making of money that we think is going to make us happier, right? So now that the money box didn't solve what's going on in here, we got a big problem, right? Because if it wasn't money and it wasn't the car and the wife and the kids and the house, and then what do we actually do? And the answer is that we have to look from within. And what I've found in most high achievers, because that's primarily who I deal with, in most high achievers, most anger and frustration is about not maximizing or fulfilling their perceived potential. And every moment that is spent not trying to maximize their potential is a moment that creates frustration and anger. So this is why the young entrepreneur is like impatient, wants everything quickly, walks fast everywhere, right? And so anytime anything messes with that pace, it creates anger and frustration. Every time we hit a roadblock and have to go backwards, we get angry, right? And so in order for us to heal from this anger, to transcend it, I should say, we have to identify what that anger is protecting us from. And so why did we need to achieve the success in the first place, right? Is it because we didn't feel good enough? Is it because we felt insecure, right? Is it because we were chosen second in school? Is it because dad was too hard on us and never believed in us, and we developed an "I'll show you" mentality? Whatever it may be, right? We use anger to get to where we are, but anger is only going to take you so far. And if we continue to rely on anger, then eventually what will happen is it'll start showing up physically. It'll start showing up in illness. It'll start showing up in weight gain and drinking too much. And this is the result of lack of awareness. And so the importance of just learning to observe that we are in anger, if that's the only thing that you pull from this podcast, is learning how to observe and catch yourself in those moments of anger. That catching yourself is the beginning first step. Up until this point, anger was unconsciously controlling you. But now that you've listened to this podcast, you can no longer let anger pass without catching it. And as you catch it, it begins to shift. The real work will begin to be, well, what is that anger protecting you from? And that's the deeper question, right? That's where you need sometimes help of somebody like me or a coach or a mentor that is able to guide you to come to the awareness around what the protection is. And if you recognize what you're protecting yourself from, you are 2/3 of the way there to becoming completely free of this thing. The last step will be to completely and fully heal from the pain or the button that the shield is protecting you from. And this is the process of letting go. It all begins with awareness. And then through awareness, we move to release. And through release, we move to realignment with our true selves. And I guess that's where I'm going to wrap it up. So if you're trapped in anger, the number one thing, the place you start is just by noticing that you are in anger. And then asking yourself, what is this protecting me from? That's where I'd encourage you to start. Thanks for taking the time to listen, and we will see you again next Sunday at noon.